without further ado, I'm really looking forward to tonight's show. I'm trying to find all my information here. Stefan Verstappen is an interesting man. He is a martial artist. He is a world traveler. He's a expert on emergency preparedness. I believe that he's also a mountain bike enthusiast, and he's written several books. Tonight, we're going to be talking primarily about his book called The Art of Urban Survival, but we're also going to be talking about an article of his which I have not been able to peruse yet, and I'm just dying to hear what he has to say about this, which has to do with historical cycles and how this might look like the end of civilization. And do we go through cycles of insanity where everyone seems to go mad? And Joe, you and I have kind of talked about this in the past, like the end of century kind of madness and certain periods where people just start breaking down.
Well, so madness is definitely infectious.
It does seem to be. So without further ado, Stefan, are you with us?
Nope, he's coming in right now.
Reading, okay.
He's joining us. He was just listening in as well.
Okay.
And I can't wait to get into this here. Hello, Stefan, are you with us?
Yeah, Joe, I'm here.
Stefan, this is...
Go ahead, Michael.
Stefan, welcome to the show. This is Michael Parker. We're so glad you could be with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Michael, for having me on.
I appreciate it.
We have a delay between the broadcast, eh?
Yeah, I was hearing a little bit of an echo, I think.
Yeah, I turned it off. Okay.
Great.
We sound great now.
Great. Stefan, I've been reading the book, The Art of Urban Survival, and we were kind of, I don't know if you got to hear all the intro, but it's interesting that you're coming on today. Obviously, the news of the day was pretty heavy, and in your book, you made a lot of good points. I was actually reading some of it aloud to my wife, and I had one page bookmark, which I can't find now, but you were talking about in times leading to war, there were certain things that would happen. And one of them was large-scale unemployment. Young men become restless. I don't have the 6 or 7 points in front of me. Another one is how the nation becomes very patriotic and bellicose. You choose enemies. These enemies, then you kind of create these stereotypes around them and make them less than human. And I don't know, I can't help but feel that we've been doing that now for going on the better part of 13 to 14 years here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. When you read history, and a lot of this, what I wrote in those sections of the book, which is you're talking about the chapter How to Survive War, and there's a chapter How to Survive Corruption and How to Survive Martial Law. Most of that material came from my reading of history. I'm a big fan of history. I read a lot of books, and I'm especially interested in history. And when you see the decline of the empire, whatever empire that might be, the Roman, the Byzantium, the Chinese, the Japanese, they all follow the same pattern. It's so predictable. It's not really, any great degree of perception or prescience to predict what's going to happen, because it's been written in the pages of history over and over again ad nauseum, so that it becomes completely predictable. And so I was listening to you earlier when you were talking about the events that are going on now, and I agree with you, Michael. It's it's not good. These are not good signs. I would say I'm shocked, but I'm not, because it's classical. It's exactly what you would expect, and you can expect those types of things to increase in frequency. It's obvious what's going on. We're heading towards, a major conflagration. There's going to be some type of a war breakout, and probably a bunch of little wars, and they may coalesce into a world war, but it's not good, and the signs are all there. I mean, I don't want to be a doom and gloomer, because I think once we're through whatever we're going to head into, we're going to come out of it much better off. But in the short term, all these events doesn't look good, no, and they're just following a classic pattern.
I would agree. I mean, it's almost cliche. Let me ask you this, Stefan, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Stefan Verstappen, is that correct?
Yeah,
good,
that's good. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so here's I read the book, but before we get to the book, I want to talk about this historical cycles and the end of civilization. And perhaps I didn't do my research thoroughly enough. I couldn't find this paper, and I'm dying to know more about it. We were just talking about how we seem to repeat these patterns over and over, but tell me more about what this is that's in your paper, because it said you started with an overview of like Chinese dynastic cycles, and then you compared it to the theory of the 4-H. Tell me a little bit more about that before we get into the art of urban survival.
Great. Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that because I'll be breaking this story on your program tonight.
Excellent.
I wrote an essay, and I sent it off to some magazines, and they're interested in publishing it, and so it's not out yet. That's why it's not in the book.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's an article that'll be coming out soon, and the article kind of explains why I wrote the book, even though I don't say in the article, this is why I wrote a book about it. But really my motivation for writing The Art of Urban Survival is because of my understanding of historical cycles. So what are historical cycles? Basically, when you look at history, you see certain patterns, and those patterns tend to repeat. And this is nothing new. I mean, the historians going back 4,000 years have all come up with their own individual theories on the cyclic nature of history. For example, the earliest known theory about cyclic history comes to us from the Vedas, which conservatively dated about 1500 BC, but many people believe they go back to maybe even 6000 BC. And in that, in the Vedas, it describes a cyclic theory of history. Now, the difference between this cyclic theory of history and many others is the time scale. In the Vedas, their cyclic theory of 4 ages, consisting of a golden age, a silver age, a bronze age, and an iron age. But their 4 ages each take place for 28,000 years. Mm-hmm. Now, moving further ahead, the Greek philosopher Polybius, back in the 3rd century BC, and then a little bit later, Ovid in the 1st century AD, the Roman philosopher, they both also came up with a theory of historical cycles. And although Polybius has a 5-stage cycle, it really didn't make a lot of sense because he has the same 4 elements, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, but he adds a 5th age called the heroic age, which Ovid, the Roman philosopher, later kind of combines into the Golden Age. And later on, when we look into the Chinese dynastic cycle, the heroic age could really fit into the Golden Age. So we have this theory, and it's been repeated many times. Toynbee and Schopenhauer and all the philosophers have come up with a theory of cyclic history. My own interest came from reading the Isaac Asimov book called the Trilogy, the Foundation Trilogy, excuse me.
Yes.
And in that science fiction book, the main protagonist, Harry Seldon, is a genius mathematician, and he looks at history and he figures out a algorithm in order to predict the future based on past patterns. So this idea really intrigued me. I was only like 15 when I read the book, and I thought, if only we had some sort of foolproof method to predict the future, wouldn't that be great? Think of what we could do with the stock market investments,
Yes, that's right.
So it's something, all people have sort of strived for, to predict the future. That's why we go to fortune tellers. That's why we like to read, prophecies and books. And so here's an idea. Well, we study history, and from history, we can now predict the future. So I was intrigued with that idea. And over the last 40 years of researching history, I always keep sort of a mental eye open for what's the pattern? What am I looking at? What do I see here? And so what I have done in the article is kind of synthesized the various cyclic theories, and most of them have a 4 or 5 stage pattern to it. But I've reduced them down to 4 stages. And basically those 4 stages are the age of heroes, the age of the intellectuals or the sages, the age of merchants, and then there is an intermediary period which is called the age of chaos. And then the cycle starts again. So that's basically the theory of the four cycles or the four stages of history. When you look at Chinese history, sometimes, it's easier to see something when you can stand back and look at it.
Certainly.
And when you look at Chinese history, it's, so foreign and alien for us, us Westerners being born and raised in the West. And so a lot of times it's easier to see things. So when you examine Chinese history, and China has the most thoroughly documented historical record of any civilization, and they go back easily 4,000 years. And so when you spread the full 4,000 years of history in front of you on a table, and then you can see the dynasties. There were 83 different dynasties, and one after the other, then this one, then the next one. And so what pattern do you see here? Well, you see that intermediate pattern or the intermediary pattern clearly all the time in between the dynasties. That's why it's so easy to predict what's happening now, because it's obviously one of the intermediary patterns. We're coming up to an age of chaos. And
hold on, Stefan. Let me make sure I understand this. Are you saying that the intermediary portion, which is the chaotic portion, when you were looking at the 4,000 years of the Chinese history between dynasties, it seemed like between dynasties, each one of them had that portion of the chaos period? Is that what you meant?
Yes, absolutely. They all
Gotcha.
They all went through that period of chaos. And we can even look at Egyptian history, another favorite topic of mine. And
Absolutely.
Of course, the intermediary periods between the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And then, you read the description of what those periods were like. The most classic example is the Papyrus of Upawar, which is allegedly written during the age of the first intermediary period between the Old Kingdom of Egypt and the Middle Kingdom. And he describes social conditions, which are horrific. I mean, this poor guy, he describes widespread corruption and thievery and criminality and starvation and a complete breakdown of society, families turning against each other, brothers turning against each other, everyone out in a struggling for survival. He even prays to the gods, let there be an end to humanity,
Wow.
Yeah. And, well, look at what happened in between all of the Chinese dynasties. The same thing. There's the warfare, the corruption, and the greed, and so that pattern is pretty clear. So let's examine the pattern. Would you like me to go over the four stages quickly?
Absolutely.
Okay, so typically a Chinese dynasty starts off with a hero. Now, the hero arises out of conditions of turmoil. He's usually, considered a freedom fighter and a revolutionary. And he's like, a Star Wars character. He's fighting the evil empire,
Mm-hmm. He's a romantic figure.
He's a romantic figure. And the empire is evil. Yeah, they're rotten by this time,
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that empire crumbles under the weight of its own greed and corruption. Typically with the Chinese, what would happen is they would all be in on the take. So, there was no money actually left to go and pay for soldiers because everybody was stealing the money, and whatever soldiers they had left in the empire were by that time starving and robbing and looting the population.
This is sounding familiar.
Yeah. So, when finally the whole thing collapses, there are no soldiers to go defend the empire. So the revolutionary leader takes over. Now, in the Chinese system, he has the mandate of heaven. Now, this is the same tactic or the same premise that all emperors and kings have used, which is, I rule by the divine right of God.
Yes.
So in China, the divine right of God was called the mandate of heaven, which meant the gods or fate had chosen this man now to found the new dynasty. So usually those early emperors, they were psychopaths, just like most of the emperors and most of the kings and shoguns and great leaders of history. They were psychopaths. Mm-hmm. But they had to conform to a certain type of protocol because they had to prove that heaven had chosen them.
Yes.
So the first few years of their rule, they were pretty benign, and there was a lot of freedom, and things started to return to normal, and women's value in society began to rise, and there was free trade, and there was prosperity and peace, and the population levels started to increase because a lot of people usually got killed off during the intermediary periods. So that was the warrior age, the man who, or the group of men that, overcame the corruption, wiped out all the evil aristocrats from the previous dynasty, and established a benevolent rule under the mandate of heaven.
The rebuild.
The rebuild, exactly. And to be honest with you, when you read the history, those were pretty good times. It was a good time to be alive,
Yes. Makes sense.
Now, yeah, makes sense. And, this is pretty intuitive. Most people, when you hear this stuff, you'll go, yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to be a genius to recognize this, So then that would last for about anywhere between 50, 100 years. And then we enter into what is known as the Golden Age. And the other philosophers called it the Golden Age. And that's where we get that term from. We get that term from Polybius, who said, those are the four ages, and one of them is golden. So after about 100 years of peace and prosperity, the intellectual age takes over. And this is the age of arts and science and a respect for intellect and scholarship. And this is the time when they're founding universities and libraries and creating grandiose palaces and public art displays and the flowering of civilization. So this would be, the golden age of Rome, in the first and second centuries. This would be the Renaissance type era where, music and intellectual pursuits suddenly became more important than conquering and killing people. So that would be the second age, or the golden age, or the age of the scholar. Then we transverse, or we evolve into the age of the merchant. Now, it starts off pretty good because we have the intellectuals sort of running things. We have a military, but they're not really that important at that point. And now, because of the peace and prosperity, we have like a free market. And the merchant age starts off with a free market. And because of that, when you have a truly free market, not the sham hoax that we are currently living under, under the assumed name of a free market, we don't have a free market. But when you truly have a free market, people can become entrepreneurs and create businesses, and people make money. And there is, at that point, some upward mobility. It's poor people can work hard, and if they're smart and industrious, they can, accumulate a small fortune for themselves and live a comfortable life. So that's the age of the merchant. However, towards the end of the age of the merchant, this is where a kind of rot sets in.
Yes.
And what we have at that point is people start to get greedy because now there's money flowing. And when there's money, then there's people that like money. And once again, the psychopaths that weren't lucky enough to be born into the aristocracy, but were, say, born peasants, but they're psychopaths. And now they have an opportunity to achieve great wealth. Well, that's what they're going to do. And as they start to accumulate more and more wealth, they spread the poison of their corruption throughout the society. So towards the end of the merchant age, you have now widespread corruption. Usually what happens is the aristocracy becomes really corrupt. They're no longer industrious. They don't really care too much about ruling the country benevolently. They've been in power now generations. They don't care about whether the people see them as benevolent rulers or not. That's when, like Miachael came out and said, it's better that they fear you than to love you. So, yeah, they start to become corrupt and licentious, and they build lavish palaces for themselves. Now, suddenly they find out the treasury has been depleted. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to increase taxes. And so they begin taxing the population. Now the free market starts to die because everything is being taxed and regulated, and there has to be kickbacks and, payoffs. They have a phrase in China called the Shangyo, which means fragrant grease. which means it's a slang word for kickbacks and
Sure.
payoff money, because now everybody has to get into the kickbacks and the payoffs, ministers, the bureaucrats, the educators, because everything starts to become greedy and things become scarce. So towards the end of this acquisitor stage, what happens is the empire starts to collapse. Money that the government collects in taxes that should go to provide services that the government traditionally provided, which was infrastructure and civil defense and disaster relief, things like that. Of course, that money is now stolen, goes into the pockets of the corrupt politicians. So what happens is the roads start to fall apart and the levees break and the fields flood and farmland is destroyed, and therefore you have a lack of food and then famine, and because the roads are destroyed, there's no way of getting the few farmers' crops that did come through that year to the cities. So now the cities are starving, and then people start to riot, and then the government sends out the army to teach them a lesson for rioting, and then there's clashes and protests and riots, and then everything falls down apart again until we find, once again, a heroic leader to rise up from, the general population, wipe out the old empire, and establish, once again, a brand new dynasty, and we're back to the beginning.
Which is all well and good. Unfortunately, that chaos part at the end, when everything falls apart, is just where we're at now, apparently, and I don't know how long it will go. And it seems like, as you've said, we should be able to avoid this. You would think that we would be able to look at the times that this has happened throughout the history of mankind and be able to avoid it, but something in our nature does not allow that.
Yeah, it's not good news.
No. I mean, listen, I'm with you. I don't want to be a doomsayer, but it blows my mind. And this is one of my pet peeves that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, and I see it all the time. All one has to do is spend 10 minutes on Facebook and see all these people that you've grown up with and all your friends and all the people that you work with and take them as a random selection of people's thoughts. And listen, most of these people probably are in a somewhat similar demographic as you, and yet their opinions could be all over the place, but generally they're not. They're all pretty run-of-the-mill. And one of the things that I see, and it just makes me crazy. And listen, in my life, I've voted Republican, I've voted Democrat, I've voted Independent, I've voted Green Party, and I will continue to do so. Because the minute that you think that any one of these groups is going to save you and that the other group is entirely evil and it's just so simplistic, it just upsets me greatly. And then that plays into the larger chaos that we're talking about, is a chaos of naivete that allows us to become weak and vulnerable. And it's just, I don't know, it's maddening to me.
Yeah. That was the point of the article, and the subtitle was it, "Are we doomed to repeat the past?" And judging from history, I can't lie. Nobody learned from the past. If we go back to the Chinese cycle, for example, the historians and the philosophers throughout China, they really knew this whole historical pattern. They didn't fail to learn from the past. They knew the past intimately. And they did everything in their power to try and convince people to stop going down this path, because look what happened to the last dynasty. It collapsed into chaos for 100 years, and millions of people lost their lives because of it. Let's stop this now. And it never worked. They were never successful in stopping it. So, even though they knew the pattern clearly and they warned the emperors, but by this time the emperors don't care. They're busy, they've got their 345 wives and their, and their drugs and their lavish lifestyles.
And who would want to upset that apple cart?
Exactly. They don't care,
No.
Sure, it's always those, they always have an excuse. Oh, the old sages, they're just a bunch of old paranoid busybodies.
Right.
They're conspiracy theorists. Who's going to listen to them? Even though, oh my God, look at it, it's already happened 47 times in the past. Still, you guys don't get it? No, still they don't get it. So. But you know what it is, Michael? I'm a big fan of not being able to escape the laws of nature. I think everything has a natural cause for it. And it may well be that our societies have to go through this stage. So
I'm beginning to agree with you, and the more that you talk about this, that's the assumption that I'm coming to as well. It may be unfortunate, but that may be the only way that we ever learn. Or maybe we don't learn, we just have to continue on. Although, and I didn't mean to completely cut you off, but the problem is, as we go farther technologically, each time we fall into the rot, into the chaos, we have more tools to further destroy ourselves to the point of wiping ourselves out.
Yeah. It's probably a natural thing. What should come to mind about the 4 ages is the 4 seasons. Spring is the founding of the new beginnings. Summer is the flowering into the golden age. Fall is the harvest, the reaping of all the benefits of a civilization. And then comes winter, where everything, certainly here in Canada, if you're down in LA, you don't notice it. But here everything dies, and you have a period of cold and darkness. And then spring comes again. So it may be that it is a natural cycle. And I'm a big fan of a book called Order Out of Chaos by Ilya Prigogine, who was a physicist, and he came up with a theory called the dissipative structure. In a nutshell, what he does is prove mathematically that a society is a living organism. So if we assume that our civilization is itself a living organism, and we are all, the individual cells of this organism, then like everything on this planet, it is born, it matures, it goes through a period where, like a young man, you're full of your power and your strength, and then you start to age and then you die. So it may be that this is unavoidable anyways, whether we learn from it or not. But, however, the good news is, as individuals, if we learn about it, we can take steps now that we will be better, or will be able to survive those periods of chaos. So if you learn from history, can you stop from repeating the same mistakes? Well, yes and no. Probably we can't stop this as a society as a whole. And for exactly the kind of reasons that you gave, we're so divided and so distracted, and which of course is a psychopath technique. Get us all fighting each other over left and right, and blue and red, and male and female, and black and white, and lesbian and gay and straight, and oh my God, well, we're all just at each other's throats over these petty differences, because we're all human beings. None of these things really matter that much compared to, living a happy, healthy life on this planet while we're here. So we're divided. So as a society, probably we can't avoid this. Now, as individuals that see the signs and can, has an understanding of history and knows where this is going. I mean, just look around you. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see what the government is doing. Obviously, they're preparing for, a revolution or massive civil unrest. There's no doubt about it. Why else would they have all these cops, trained like military? You can't tell the difference anymore between a police officer and a military person. They got the same gear and equipment, and now they have tanks, and they're ordering millions of rounds of ammunition. Oh, please. For what reason? Of course the reason is obvious. They know what's coming. No doubt they've got, scientists working on some predictive model to show, how long it's going to take before we all get pissed off enough to start marching in the streets so they can mow us down,
Yes.
They've got that figured out. Now, as individuals, people that listen to your show, you, Joe, me, we're aware of what's going on. You know the pattern. You can see what's coming, so we can take steps now. And there's a lot of things we can do, and that's where the book, The Art of Urban Survival, comes in, because, disaster preparedness, learning how criminals work, because crime is a big part of all this intermediate period. You see crime increasing all the time. Gangs are going to start ruling neighborhoods. Well, they do so now,
Yes.
So by preparing as individuals and communities, working together, trying to get your own tribe together, find like-minded people, and making some simple preparations, your chances of surviving increase huge. Remember, most of the people that die during these intermediary periods never saw it coming, never made any preparations, don't have any of the skills, never developed any of the skills to survive it. And so, disease was also a big problem because in the past, when the intermediary periods, because of the hunger and the starvation and the lack of clean water and things like that, disease was probably accounted for 80% of the deaths. So once you know a few simple things about, social distancing and how to treat and isolate and quarantine and have some of those skills, your chances of survival are really good. And working together and being slightly prepared, you don't have to have an underground bunker. We don't need that. We need people to work together on the same level, and we will survive this. And hopefully it'll be over in five years, maybe 10 years. But at the other end, there will be a new age of freedom and prosperity and peace.
Wow. Well, that is as good a segue as I can think of. And in the second hour, I want to talk about the art of urban survival. But before we leave this too much, I've got to ask you, you are a deep thinker. Even just the sound of your voice is a very gentle and humane voice. I like it a lot. How did you come about to these types of interests and this type of research and the desire to put this type of information out there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Michael. I don't really talk about it. I'm going to reveal it for the first time for you.
Okay.
I had what is termed an enlightenment experience, which let's distract us from any kind of really spiritual context. I was 12 years old and I was in Holland, and one night I snuck out and I went for a walk in the city late at night in Eindhoven. And I realized, and it's a weird thing to say, but I realized I was a human being, I was self-aware, and I was on this planet, and I had a whole life to live here. And that was the most amazing thing in the world. And since that time, I've always had an incredible thirst for knowledge. I'm curious about everything. I read. I'm interested in people's ideas. I'd never stick to an orthodoxy. If I hear one opinion, I always seek out a counter opinion. I want to hear what everybody else has to think. Yeah. And so I think after 40 years of that type of an attitude, it's purely an attitude, which is, I thirst for knowledge and experience. And I've done as much as I can in my life to experience the world, to travel the world, to master skills, to read books, to ponder philosophy. And after all these years, you sort of come to these types of conclusions, because what it is, of course, truth. Truth by itself will be discovered by everybody that seeks it. It is the same at that level, So if you're interested in truth, and it's hard to find, and it's like, C.S. Lewis's Pilgrim's Progress, there's a lot of pitfalls along the way that you can get trapped in. Like you could get trapped in thinking you're a Green Party voter and therefore you hate Republicans, or you can get trapped into thinking, you're whatever sort of political ideology or philosophical ideology. The truth is always immutable, and it doesn't matter where you come from, what country you come from. If you have an honest desire to seek that truth, you will find the same thing. So, I'm sure what I'm saying resonates with you, Michael, because you've been looking at this. You want to know the truth. You don't want to bullshit yourself. I don't want to tell myself lies, whether I feel good about it or not. I want to know the truth, whether it hurts me or whether it doesn't. And when you have that type of attitude, this stuff will resonate with you. And look at the history, look at what's going on around us today. What other truth could there be? Obviously, we're going through a cycle. Obviously, they know what's going on, meaning the powers that be, and they're preparing like they've always done. They always tried to prepare. Every single dynasty tried to hole up behind a wall of security and hope that it all blows over so that they can come out and rule the world again. Mm-hmm. Never works out for them. It never works out,
So even all the underground bunkers and the seed safes and the elaborate underground super secret hangouts just never work out, huh?
Never works out. I was in...
That's good to hear.
No, to me, I always thought that was a positive point in history.
Absolutely.
We know that, the so-called elite have their plans, right? We know about the bunkers. We know that that's the reason why they got all the security and they're spying on us all the time, because they're scared shitless. They know what's coming. We're going to rise up, or people will rise up, and things will get nasty, and they're threatened by that. So they do what all despots and tyrannies have done throughout history, which is, the Chinese emperors would always flee to the countryside where they had a huge estate and they would have thousands of troops stationed out there, and they would think, well, I'll just go to my castle in the countryside, and once it all blows out, we'll come back. But it doesn't happen. I'll give you an example. When I was in Hong Kong, I went over to Kowloon, which is on the mainland Chinese section, and near one of the old walled cities, there is a monument, and the monument says basically, here died so-and-so, the last Ming emperor. And the last Ming emperor was before the Qing dynasty, fled from the capital in Beijing to this isolated, lonely spot in the south of China. It would be as if, Barack Obama fled to some small fishing village on the coast of Alaska, and there they caught up with him and finally killed him.
Mm-hmm.
These people never escaped. So they can make all the plans they want. I personally am not advocating violence of any kind, but trust me, these people never survived this period either. It's people like you and me that work together. We keep keep your head down, and make some plans, and the elite will go, and all the armored personnel carriers and all the military, they all disappear during these periods of times. And a lot of stupid people will go too. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what happens. They don't make plans. They don't know how to handle it. And a lot of those people will go too. And what's left are people that have prepared and still, and that's why the next age is so good, because we've gotten rid of all those crazy people.
In some way, that's evolution.
Yeah, it works out that way. And
spiritual evolution, maybe a little bit.
I think it's more spiritual, to be honest with you,
yes.
Because this is the battle. I've thought about this, and my first book is called The 36 Strategies of Ancient China, which is a compendium of military tactics and very ruthless kind of tactics from ancient China, similar to The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And looking at the situation from a strategic point of view, we're not going to win this with any kind of a battle or fighting the cops in the streets or rioting. It's not going to be won. This doesn't work that way. And from the study of history, yeah, they've risen up and they've, created revolutions, but those revolutions really that wasn't the primary cause of change. The primary cause of change is a mental, a spiritual, and attitudinal change in the population. That's what makes the difference between the period of chaos and a new heroic age. It's not because they had some guy was more bloody than somebody else. It was because the people as a whole started to change their attitude, and that was able to take us out of the darkness.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Stefan Verstappen. His website is urbansurvivalstrategies.com. He has another website called chinastrategies.com. He is the author of The Art of Urban Survival. For the first hour, we've been talking about a paper of his that I can't wait to read in its entirety, The Historical Cycles and the End of Civilization. In the second half of the show, I know we're coming up on our commercial breaks here any moment now. In the second half of the show, we're going to be talking about The Art of Urban Survival more fully, and some of the down and dirty, just practical tips that one can have. And I was reading aloud to my wife some of these things, just about protecting your own home. If you have intruders, if you are overcome by someone trying to carjack you, what to do in the case of some type of bacteriological situation. So there's going to be a lot of actual practical knowledge in the second hour. I think the book is extremely well written, and even though we're going to tell you a lot of these things, there's no way that I could give you all the scenarios, so you'll have to buy the book, but it's a wonderful piece of work. Stefan, I've really enjoyed this first hour so much. Joe, do you have anything before we go out to the break?
No, we're going out right now.
Yeah, I hear something happening.
Don't go anywhere, everyone. Don't go away.
We'll be back shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Hour 2 of the Electric Pyramid here on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. My name is Michael Parker, and I welcome you to our second hour. I've got to say, this is show number 8, and this may be the most enlightening one yet to me. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Stefan Verstappen is our guest. He is an emergency preparedness expert. He is a martial artist, an author, a world traveler. He is a mountain bike enthusiast. He is a Renaissance man. Stefan has lived and traveled through China and East Asia. While in Asia, he studied Oriental art, culture, and Kung Fu. He is a master of the Lohan School of Martial Arts and one of the few Westerners to have lived and studied Kung Fu in China. We're going to be talking about his book, which is The Art of Urban Survival. And if the first hour seemed perhaps filled with a very big idea, this is the hour where we can give you some practical ideas of how to protect yourself and how to protect your family and your property when the proverbial feces hits the fan, if you know what I mean. Stefan, this book, I've been reading it for the past week, and there were pieces that I read to my wife. My wife is far more practical than myself at times. I get a little dreamy, but I was reading her many of the things in here, and I've got to say, of all the stuff that I've read in preparation for the show, this book may be the single most helpful, because you have outlined, gosh, I don't even know how many, maybe perhaps a couple hundred scenarios here, and provided an outline for how to deal with this. And yet at the beginning, you explained that much of the people that we will run into our life who will cause many of the problems that we'll later have to deal with in the remainder of the book are various forms of psychopaths. And I don't know if we'll have to get too much further into the idea of that, but let's just talk about it for a second. You give some common types of psychopaths. I think people, when they hear the word psychopath, they think of something like Charles Manson or, another serial killer or serial rapist of some sort. But it's funny, when I was looking at your videos on YouTube, I heard the word psychopath, and then a person that I consider to be a psychopath was the person that was in the video, and that was Dick Cheney.
Oh, yeah.
Let's speak about that.
Well, I'm a big fan for origins. I always want to try and get back. What's the essence of things? What's, I was intrigued with the unified field theory of Einstein. Is there some underlying principle that explains things? And so I'm always trying to distill it down to its essence. So, and reading history and seeing, over and over again, the slaughter and the bloodshed and the cruelty and the hatred and, oh my God. And yet, when I deal with people one-on-one, I don't see that. I see human beings like myself, and people want to raise their families. They want to be happy. They want to... where does this evil come from? Why can we not learn from it? Why does it occur all the time? And so trying to get to the essence of all this, or at least the majority of it, some of it, yeah, we can explain, behaviorally. But it turns out that what I think it is again, like I said, we can't escape nature. So just like a civilization is a living entity that must go through the stages of birth and death, so on an individual level, we have predators. When you look at nature, nature is cruel. I love to be outdoors. I'm a big fan. I'm a wilderness survival fan, and I just came back from my bike ride before the show. I always go out every day for a bike ride along the beach, but Mother Nature is a cruel bitch, so can we escape the rules of Mother Nature? Now, when we look at anywhere else in the food chain, everything has something that it eats and something that eats it. It's the Ordors, the snake that eats its tail. It's a circle. So what eats humans? Well, we don't have anything that eats us anymore, really. We're not being eaten by tigers anymore, and so did we escape? Did we escape the law of nature that we have no natural predators anymore? Well, no, we didn't escape the law of nature. We do have natural predators. And those natural predators are ourselves, or rather a type of person that somehow evolved into a kind of predatory personality. So we have predators, and they're called psychopaths. Now we have predators on a very basic level, like the serial killers and serial rapists and career criminals. But they're only a small percentage of the types of psychopaths that inhabit our society. There's another type of psychopath that is what we call a professional psychopath. And I think the difference lies basically in intelligence and in social economic background. So if you're kind of dumb and you come from the wrong side of the track and you have whatever gene or epigenetic influence that turns you into a psychopath, well, then you're going to become a career criminal or a rapist or a serial killer. But if you come from a family that has a lot of money, or if you come from a family that has a lot of money and you have intelligence and you're a psychopath, well, then you become president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. You explain that, and one of the paragraphs that you bring that up in, again, I read this to my wife because it made me laugh, and yet it's one of those things that I always knew. You said that in the corporate structure as well, these types of psychopaths they've got an advantage. I mean, they are almost built for this type of structural scaling. I mean, they are not encumbered by the moral dilemmas and concerns that the rest of us have. They will step on anyone. They will cut off heads. They will do whatever they have to do to get where they want to go, and they are not encumbered by any guilt.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded of the scene from the movie The Thing, the original one from the 1980s. Do you remember
James
that?
Arness, yes.
No, the one with Kurt Russell.
Oh, okay. The newer one, the one in the 80s.
The one in the 80s, the one in the middle. So, and the doctor is examining the alien DNA or whatever, and he predicts, oh my God, it will take over the entire planet in 30 days. So we have to kill ourselves and destroy the station. When you look at psychopaths and you see their ability to move up in any hierarchical organization, and you do the math, I feel like the professor, oh my God, these guys will eventually take over the world. Well, they have,
Yes.
Because, and it's simple, because when you are competing, for example, if there are two people competing for a position, let's say it's a job, and you have one person who is like us, normal, we have feelings, we have emotions, we care about people, we want to be good people. You and I you try, right? You want to be a good person. So you don't cheat, you don't lie, you don't steal, you don't take credit for other people's works, you don't, sleep with your friends' wives, things like that, right? You try to be a decent human being. Now, your competitor, if he's a psychopath, none of that matters to him.
Right.
They can lie and cheat and steal and blackmail and bribe and frame and so now you're in a competition with them and they're cheating and you're playing by the rules.
And they are apex predators.
They're the predators, yeah. So because, the lion doesn't feel sorry for the gazelle it's eating. It can't. So neither does this guy or woman that is competing with you care about you or anybody else. You're nothing to them. So I remember telling one of the guys at the office, I said, I could have your job tomorrow. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, it'd be simple. I would stay late at work, and then I would slip some cocaine into your desk. And then I would go to your computer, and I'd download some child porn. Not that I know where to get some of that stuff, but anyways, just theoretically. And then tomorrow morning, I would go and rat you out to the boss, Go check out this guy's computer. He's got child porn. He's snorting coke. And they would find the coke. They'd bring the cops in. You're out on your ass, and I got your job. That's what a psychopath does,
Yes.
How can you fight that? It's very, very difficult to go up against a psychopath as a decent, honest human being and win. You can't win because we don't have what it takes, which is a lack of empathy. You have to be cruel and vicious. And I can't be cruel and vicious. I just can't do it. So I will always lose to them. And, I've lost out a lot in a lot of things in life because I can't be cruel. And I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's the way I am. And so if that means I lose, then fine. I'm the loser, and the charming psychopath can be the winner. And because they are charming, they're brilliant actors and actresses. They can mimic your emotions. They can cold read you and get do a psychological profile. They profile us, They can look at you, talk to you for 10 minutes, kind of figure out what turns your crank and the way you think, and then they adapt their approach to you so that they can manipulate you, and they're just like you. They're mimicking you. They're mirroring you, and they're using neuro-linguistic programming, and so can you do that? I can't do that. I can't be that devious, that scheming to succeed, but they can. And so in a fair fight, they are going to win. And in a fair fight for a position of power, and they love power. See, me personally, I'm not interested in power. I never have been. I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't want to tell anybody else what to do. I don't want to lord it over anybody. Never meant anything to me. I don't care about that. But for these people, that's all they care about. They want to tell people what to do. They want to lord it over you. That's the only thing that gives their life meaning, is to make your life miserable. So it's a tough battle to go up against them. But before you know anything else about the world, know your enemy, as Sun Tzu would say. And your enemy are the psychopaths.
I would agree with that. And one of the things that I have failed to understand, when people talk about the idea of conspiracy theories, and generally we all know that that is a term that is always used in a disparaging fashion by people who, they're just not going to have it, right? Oh my gosh, well that's an alternative viewpoint. You were just a conspiracy theorist. And what always frustrates me and blows my mind, listen, I'm into astrology. I'm a Scorpio. I have always been fascinated by mystery and death and polarity, and I know the depth of my own good and bad. So it never surprises me that there can be people that are absolutely just thoroughly rotten beyond anything that you can even understand or guess or is out there. And yet, it makes sense to me. Some of those people have to exist. And if it is like you're describing, this is part of a natural process, then a certain percentage of these human organisms are going to be this particular type. And yet, there's people out there that, they could see something happen in another country and believe that that occurred. But then when you talk about dear, beautiful USA, America, conspiracy surely can't happen here because our leaders would not do that to us. There's just no way. And it's that type again, of this blind allegiance and naivete that's going to get you into trouble, because psychopaths are in all walks of life. And like you're saying, yes, I don't really want power either. I want to prosper. I want to take care of my family. I want to do the things that I enjoy. Yet I don't want to be a president. I don't want to be a cop, which leads to my next point, which is the way they're choosing policemen now and the militarization of the police. And you talk a little bit about dealing with cops in the book.
Yeah. Well, in the book on dealing with the police, understand that in history and in almost every other culture in the world, cops are bad guys. They weren't the good guys. The whole idea that we think that police are supposed to serve and protect, that's a pretty recent phenomenon. In history and in different cultures, like, for example, China has had a long history of not trusting the police. You read those, or you watch those movies about Chinatown and how they never go and cooperate with the police when they're, trying to investigate the triads and things like that. Well, the reason they don't do that is because for 4,000 years, the police in China have always been corrupt. They've always worked with the gangsters. They've always been on the take. So you can never trust the police. Now, I still think that we have some good police, but
absolutely,
how can you tell the difference? How would you know? Because psychopaths like power, and what kind of a power is better than being a cop? You are above the law. You can pull over anybody anytime you want, and handcuff them and interrogate them or enter their house, and you can pull out a gun and you can shoot them, and what happens to you? Nothing, obviously. Look at all the cases of the police brutality and shooting people and shooting dogs and shooting at children. And are you kidding me?
It seems like it's escalating.
It seems like it's escalating because, of course, more and more psychopaths are being attracted to that profession. And
I think that's being done intentionally, don't you think?
I agree. It is.
They're farming them.
Absolutely. They're encouraging that. The psychopaths in charge have poisoned our entire culture with what I call psychopathic family values, So our culture is poisoned like that. So now let's say you're driving in the car. Let's say you're a person of a minority and you're pulled over by the car. Now, let's hope that the cop is one of the good ones. One of the old-fashioned guys that he's doing his job. He's just trying to feed his family, and he's trying to do the right thing for society. Okay, that'd be great. Then I have nothing to worry about. Or is he one of the probably 10 to 20% of the cops that are full-blown psychopaths? Mm-hmm. And you've read the stories. They rape, they murder, they'll steal money from dead bodies in the middle of the street. So about 10 to 20% are going to be full-blown psychopaths. Now, all you see in the back through the mirror is a pair of headlights. How can you tell if that guy's a psychopath or if he's a good cop? Well, you're going to have to do the same thing that the police does. They assume you're a criminal. You better assume that they're a psychopath. And when you're dealing with men with loaded weapons, you always have to be very careful.
Agreed.
So that's why in the book I say, you have to keep your hands on the steering wheel and you have to talk to them calmly. This is not, Sun Tzu always says, don't fight a battle you can't win. And there is no battle you can win with the cops. So if they pull you over, you better well be goddamn polite and careful of your body language and don't make any quick movements and don't put your hand in the glove compartment until you've told the cop that you're going for your ID so he doesn't think you're going for a gun and shoot you through the window. You're dealing with people with guns. You have to be careful. It's a survival situation. I want to believe that he's a good cop. I want to believe he's going to go home and hug his kids at the end of his shift. I can't assume that. I have to assume that he's a dangerous person and act accordingly.
Let me take it to the next level. You have a portion of the book that talks about dealing with martial law, and it seems like we are inevitably moving towards that at some point, certainly with these increased amounts of ammunition that's being bought. because I don't want to give away your whole book. I want people to buy it, but I want to have a couple of things that we do. What do we do? I live in Los Angeles. I'm in North Hollywood. Now, when North Hollywood and Greater Los Angeles comes under martial law, what am I going to do? And listen, I was here when the riots happened. It was unlike anything that I have ever seen in my entire life. Here's some full disclosure. I was attacked the first night and almost killed. And I spent most of the next 48 hours in and out of consciousness. But I do remember the town being on fire. There was no infrastructure that could even come to the home that I was at. The only people that showed up were the firemen. So I want to kind of, for the audience, I want you to impart some of your information. Let's say North Hollywood and Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles, is now under martial law. What should I do with my family?
Well, the best thing is to stay put and to stay under the radar. And that's the best advice I can give. Now, martial law sounds terrible, but I lived in a country that has the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest continuous period of martial law, and that is Taiwan. They declared they declared martial law in 1948 or something like that, and when I was there in 1989, they were still under martial law. And I have never lived in a freer country than Taiwan under martial law. Yeah, I was free to do anything I wanted. The only thing you couldn't do was talk politics. So if you were in a bar and you said, "Oh, by the way, the Kuomintang," which is the national party at the time, they're a bunch of crooks, which of course they were. They were triads from Shanghai. He was part of the Green Gang, and Chiang Kai-shek. He was a hatchet man. He was an assassin for an organized crime family in Shanghai. And they sponsored him to go to military academy, and they set him up to become president. But they still controlled him even after he was president. So if you were to bring up something like that in casual conversation, well, the secret police would be at your apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you'd have 1 hour to pack your bags and get out of the country. But everything else you could do, smuggling and drugs and drinking and staying up all night and driving around without a driver's license and things. They didn't give a shit about that. As long as you didn't talk politics, you're fine. So martial law can come in different, variations and different degrees of severity. The thing with martial law is the best strategy is to play what's called the gray man, because you don't want to stand out in a dangerous environment. For example, if you don't want to be the one wildebeest in the savannah, that all the lions can see for miles around, right? Mm-hmm. Wait a minute, there's one over there. You don't want to make yourself a target, so you keep a low profile. And playing the gray man means, it's a term that they use for when you enter a prison system as well, means that any attention you draw to yourself in that environment is always going to be negative attention. So you don't talk about politics with your family and friends. You don't go to the protest meetings or the protests. You don't write letters to the congressman. I know this sounds terrible, like you're giving in, but all those things don't do any good anyways. You can go and protest, you can go and riot, you can write letters to your congressman. All it does is put you on a list. It's not going to help anything, because all those tactics are basically begging psychopaths, please relinquish some of your power. And of course, that's never going to happen. So, like getting back to never trying to fight a battle you can't win. You cannot win a battle. You, Michael Parker, and your small family is not going to win standing on your principles against the full force of the United States military-industrial complex, right? So,
come on.
It's noble. Michael might say, listen, I'm not going to show you my goddamn ID papers in order to buy a loaf of bread. I'm making a principled stand right here and now. Well, you and your family are going to be gone. Agreed. That's it. So, I encourage people not to be heroes because you're not going to win this fight. If I thought there was a chance, if I thought, listen, we all go out there and we'll all, we'll stand up to them and we'll win this. No, we won't because it's never happened before. What they do is they bring out the machine guns and they mow you down. That's what they do. So for me, the purpose of this book is to get Michael Parker and your family to survive the 10 years, 5 to 10 years that are coming with your family intact. And then after that, use your principles to build a better society. But at this point, there's nothing you can do. So keep your nose down, keep your nose clean, stay out of the limelight. Don't make any pointless stands on principle when you're facing, 100 guys with guns. They don't care about your principles. They don't care about your noble stands. So that means, showing your papers to get the loaf of bread. Hopefully, as I mentioned in the previous chapter on what to do when society becomes corrupt, you have to become part of a black market, an underground economy. Mm-hmm. I'm part of it right now. I buy contraband cigarettes. I'm hate to say it, but right. The ones that aren't taxed by the government because the taxes here are through the roof. So I go to a dealer, under the table from the Indian reservation. I'm already a part of it. So, yeah. The reason I asked this is because you explained it just the way I wanted to, and I mean I knew that you were going to. And in the book, for example, you give excellent lists of what should be in a bug out kit, and you have explanations of a lot of different things. But in this particular case, when we're talking about dealing with authority on a face-to-face basis, you got to be on the sly as them. Mm-hmm. You have to profile them just like they're profiling you. And at one point, you make the point that fleeing sometimes, we associate fleeing with cowardice. No, fleeing is sometimes live to fight another day. Surrender is absolute defeat. Yes.
And so we've got to be like foxes. We have to be as smart and as, I don't want to say devious, but we have to be as agile and adaptive as they are.
No, you're right. You have to be devious. What you mentioned is actually strategy number 36 in the book, and which is one of the reasons I wrote the book on the 36 strategies. Is you got to understand how devious people think, how psychopaths think,
yes.
and the kind of tactics and strategies they use, because the best thing, your greatest survival tool is your mind and your perception. If you can see what's going on, you will survive. If you're not aware of what's going on, you will be blindsided. And when you're blindsided, you don't have time to react, and you're usually down for the count. It's called a sucker punch. Some guy walks up to you in a bar that you've never seen before. He punches you in the jaw. Physiology being what it is, you will go down. You didn't see it coming. And it's the same with a lot of the things that will happen in the next couple of years. If you're not aware of how devious your government can be and the tricks that they will pull on you, it's like being sucker punched. You get hit, you won't know what's going on, and then you go down for the count. You can't fight anymore. A smart guy, and like Tactic 36 is, if all else fails, retreat. Because, surrender is complete defeat.
Yes.
But if you run away, it's partial defeat. Because you can always come back and win the next battle. And, going back to the Chinese dynastic cycles, one of the most famous emperors, the founder of the Han Dynasty, wow, this guy was defeated like 6 times, and, he was down to 20 people hiding up in the mountains, and they said, there's no chance you will win, and he went on to found probably the greatest dynasty in Chinese history. So long as you are alive, you still have a chance to win. But if you kill yourself because you did something stupid and you died for just a stupid reason, that is tragic. That's horrible. If you're going to die, then at least die for a good reason. You've done everything you can. You've fought the good fight. You've been smart and you've been shrewd. And, sometimes accidents happen, and, there are situations beyond our control. Nothing you can do about it, but God damn it, you went down with dignity. But to fight a losing battle. That's stupid. No.
I agree. And when you're talking about dealing with authority, you have to somewhat play their game to a certain extent. I want to kind of change gears a little bit. I know that you are quite the enthusiast on martial arts. You include in one portion of the book quite a few maneuvers in hand-to-hand battle for people for particular techniques for grappling and escaping and things of this nature. Let's talk about martial arts and what that has had to do with shaping your ideas and your philosophy.
Well, my interest in martial arts came out of my spiritual studies. I was accused of being too much of a nerd when I was younger. I was always
Gotcha.
my nose in a book, and also, if you've been to my website, I love art, and I'm always doing art projects, and then my third great love is nature. So everybody thought, he's kind of a hippy dippy,
Sure.
nerdy guy. He's either reading a book or he's out and canoeing in the park and things like that. So, and like I said too, I always want truth, even if it hurts me. And one of the truths I realized about myself was that I was a little bit soft.
Mm-hmm.
I was. So I thought, and when I read, the stories and the biographies of the people I admired, like the founding fathers, and
Yes.
Hemingway, he was a boxer, and I love these guys. Man, they were brave. They had guts. They did things. Oh my God, they lived lives of passion and courage. Oh my God, who wouldn't want to be like that? So I thought, well, let's do something that requires, extreme self-discipline and a little bit of courage. So I got interested in martial arts, and the other reason was also because I was at the time a follower of the Fourth Way School, as taught by Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. And the Fourth Way School is a type of philosophy or a spiritual path. But basically what it says is you work on three things all at the same time. You work on your intellect, you work on your emotions, and you work on your body.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the intellect covered. I was always reading, and I loved science. I had the emotions covered. Emotions, I read poetry and literature, and I loved art, and especially I love my Canadian painters, the Group of Seven, and Tom Thompson, where I discovered him because I used to canoe in the same park that he painted in his paintings back in the 1900s, So my emotional self was developed that way. But still physically I was a little bit, kind of soft. So martial arts gave me a kinesiatic intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And it really gave me the courage to do a lot of the things I do. Because when if you're seeking truth, it's kind of strange, but the whole world is against you. You have to battle everybody and everything because, we live in just lies and deceit and treachery, and people all have vested interests in supporting lies and deceit and treachery. So, to seek the truth and to be honest, you are going against the grain, and you better be tough because
Sure.
you won't survive it. And there's no better way of learning to be tough than taking martial arts. And when I got into it, I wasn't going to be one of these philosophical martial artists that, like to talk about the philosophy of it and never breaks a sweat. No, I did everything. Full contact sparring, takedowns, ground fighting, full contact weapon sparring. And then, we went from school to school challenging people to fights and things like that because I didn't want to be, lie to myself. I wanted to know, does this stuff work? Can I face people in combat? Things like that, And it gives you the courage to live an honest life. You have to be tough to face all, the obstacles that you have in your life. And martial arts is a great way of making you tough. And it also will give you the confidence, because confidence is key in all these battles. For example, you've seen probably some of those YouTube videos where, a chipmunk will face down a pit bull,
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between that? Why was this chipmunk able to defeat a pit bull? Well, it's like Miyamoto Musashi wrote in his book, The Book of Five Rings. Miyamoto was a famous Japanese swordsman, undefeated in 60 battles, and oh my God, this guy had balls. You're facing somebody with a 4-foot straight razor, and he's going to slice you to pieces. And he did that 60 times, maintained his composure through all this stuff, But what he said is, in a battle where all things are equal, whoever has the greatest spirit will win. So when you have a chipmunk facing down a pit bull, it's because that chipmunk had that spirit. It's not because the chipmunk was bigger or stronger or could defeat the pit bull with kung fu tactics. No, it was his spirit. And that's why I encourage people to study a little bit of martial arts. If you have any kind of inclination, and even if you don't, because trust me, before I started taking martial arts, I was the last person you would guess that would become a martial artist, peace and love kind of, I used to go out in the woods and talk to trees for a lot,
Sure.
But,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you this. When we're talking about self-defense, at some point we have to address weapons as well. And you address weapons. And certainly right now that is a hot button topic in the U.S. I grew up in Texas. We had a closet full of guns.
Sure.
And I grew up amongst hunters. I hunted. I'm not a huge gun fan. I don't, hang out with a bunch of guns or whatever, but I am pro right to defend myself. I would just wonder, given your subjects of expertise, what do you say to people when the gun subject comes up? How do you address that?
Yeah, well, it's a very tricky subject, especially here in Canada, where, as you may know, that we have some of the toughest gun laws.
That's right.
However, we're still allowed to own them. I'm like you, I've been around guns, and I've learned to shoot guns and a variety of guns because it's something you should learn to do.
Certainly.
It's a tool in your toolbox of survival skills. Does that mean, that I'm going to, get my AK-47 and barricade myself and shoot everybody? No, it's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with survival. And in a battle for your life, a weapon is always the advantage. So if I'm going to give you instruction on how to survive combat, well, get a weapon. That's the first rule, And it's interesting that, the whole martial arts arose out of a weapons ban. That's why we have martial arts, because the government in Japan, under the shoguns, banned people from owning swords. So they said, well, we can't own swords and we can't own spears, so we'll make our hand a sword and we'll make our finger a spear. And so empty-hand martial arts arose out of a gun ban. So even when the governments try to ban you from having weapons, people will still evolve and develop weapons on their own anyways, because weapons are a survival tool. And if you look at it as a tool for survival, so you have your matches, you have a pocket knife, and if you have a weapon, well, it's a tool. It doesn't mean I advocate going around killing people or resorting to violence, but what are you going to do, Mike? Are you going to sit there on the couch and watch, 6 men gang rape your wife? Or are you going to pick up the gun and shoot them?
That's right.
In that situation, you don't have any other choice. You're not going to defeat them with stern language, Right. So in that situation, my God, you will be thankful if you had a weapon nearby. And if you didn't have a decent weapon like a handgun or a shotgun, then if you could quickly improvise something that would increase your power so that at least you could take out the first couple of bastards, that's what you should do, because it's a survival situation. So weapons are a tool. I tend to be neutral on them. I don't love guns, but on the other hand, I think everybody should have one. Definitely.
Yeah. I agree with you. Listen, the only reason I bring that up is because everything you've said is so well thought out and so reasonable. I just wanted to hear how you felt about that, because, here again, it's just one of those things that people get so emotional about on both sides of the subject. And listen, I've been around guns, and I have no particular romantic fascination with them, but you know what? They can come in handy if a particular situation happens. And recently, 2 blocks, or actually it was about 4 blocks away from here, a guy got on top of a house with an AK-47. And this was a well-publicized situation here in Los Angeles. I mean, all the news covered it for the 3 or 4 hours that this thing happened. This guy basically takes an off-ramp here in North Hollywood, jumps out, and he's got an AK-47 right beside his school, runs 2 blocks, climbs up on top of somebody's house, and there's a standoff for a couple of hours. Yeah. I thought the guy was going to die right there on the top of the house, but he eventually, actually he got into the house, then they threw some tear gas canisters in there and he gave up. I figured they were going to have to kill him. Point being, that was just a matter of blocks away from my home. And, yes, there are times when you're going to have to deal with unsavory people, and, it's better to be armed in a case like that.
Well, if I could interrupt.
Certainly.
Here, I'm in South Carolina. And we have very, loose standards for guns in comparison to California, or where I'm originally from, New York, most certainly. But here we don't really have a lot of those problems, even on the violent level with guns. And I can't help but assume it's because everyone in this state is armed. I mean, everyone knows if you're breaking into a particular house, that those people might be there. The chance of them having a gun is 90%. I mean, everybody's armed here. And the difference is, just recently, a pizza man was delivering pizza, and he went to the residence, and the door opened. He was met by 2 gentlemen that were robbing him at gunpoint, and the pizza delivery guy pulled out his own gun and he shot both of them. And he was on the news as kind of a local hero because he went back and finished his shift at work. And here, if it were New York, that pizza guy would have had to, he would have been arrested too, and there would have been a whole big process. But that's how it goes. If you want the bull, you get the horns.
I agree, and it gets back to the thing that we were talking about earlier. You've got to play on the playing field that they're already on. And listen, if the government is loading up on a monstrous amount of ammunition, and yet they don't want you to have the same, you have to be honest and ask yourself, well, why would this be? I mean, why would they need all this additional firepower, and yet there's this talk by Hollywood celebrities and the rest of the people that they're getting to carry water for them, then I should give up mine.
It does worry me, yes.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, I don't want to oversimplify it, but here again, it gets back to this naivete again. It's like you've got to ask yourself, literally, I've got to be manly about this and think, without being emotional, why would this be? Maybe, just maybe, things are not on the up and up. And maybe I need to live my life with a bit of my own truth speaking through me, instead of being scared into submission and just doing what the crowd's doing because I could be shamed at work or shamed by my social circle because I've got X amount of guns or this, that, or the other thing. And it comes down to just being aware of the situation. I mean, the times are changing. The sand is moving under our feet, and you can't allow yourself to believe everything that you see or hear on the talking heads of television.
No, I think that's a very reasonable approach that you have, Mike. When the shoguns banned average people from carrying weapons, immediately afterwards, they instituted a military surveillance state that would make, the NSA blush. And this is in medieval Japan, but they had extensive snitch networks, and you couldn't leave your village without papers, and you had police checkpoints all along the road, and nobody was allowed to carry any types of weapons. So And then the same thing, how the whole Shaolin Kung Fu started was the same reason. The emperor banned swords and banned people from having spears. And, well, shortly thereafter, guess what happened? A tyranny developed, and the government had snitch networks and was taxing people and suppressing everybody through violence. Well, because they first disarmed them. The story of history shows that when a government disarms its population, tyranny follows. I'm just telling you what I've seen in history. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not, my opinion. No, that's what always happens. It always happens that way. Wait a minute. The government wants to become tyrannical. First thing they do is say, listen, everybody's got to turn in their swords. That's what they do. And then everybody turns in their swords, and guess what happens next? Always the same, so
it seems elementary.
It's elementary. It's so basic. So no, I think and Joe, what you were saying about North Carolina, I had some friends from North Carolina, and yeah, I know about the gun culture. They would tell me stories.
It's a different world.
It's a different world.
I even lived out there in L.A. Where Parker is. Different world with the gun control here. It's they won't have any of that discussion. It really seems third world to them.
Yeah.
It's just everyone having a gun here. It's not a discussion. It's just part of everything. You have a mailbox. You have a gun. You have a stove in your kitchen, and the wife of the house knows how to use the shotgun.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to. And I don't care who you are. You fire off a shotgun, people are running. You don't even really need to aim it in the right direction. You fire that off, and no one's going to stick around.
No, exactly. Everybody's really polite if everybody's armed.
Yeah,
Agree.
That's the secret.
Stefan, let me ask you. Let me take us back to the beginning of the show now. So you were saying that you are kind of sending the article around. When do you think that we'll be able to read Historical Cycles and the End of Civilization?
Well, to be honest with you, Trends Journal, Gerald Celente said...
Of course, love Gerald.
And I wrote it for Gerald.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been corresponding with Gerald. He sent me a copy of his book, and I sent him a copy of my book, and because he had actually written me when he saw the video Defense Against a Psychopath. And I love Gerald, and he's a big fan of close combat fighting and the kind of no bullshit martial arts.
Yes.
Just take this guy down quick and fast and don't fool around with any fancy nonsense,
Yeah.
So he's like my my spiritual brother like that. So I wrote this hoping that they would publish it first, and their editor wrote back and they said they were interested. But I haven't formalized the deal yet with them, so I can't say for certain that they're still going to take it. I'm 90% sure they'll publish it, probably in their fall issue. But after that, I will certainly make it available everywhere. But I would send you a copy. But I just can't release it right now because it's first right of refusal for.
Oh, I absolutely understand that. No, I was just I'm anxious, not just for me. I want everybody to be able to read it, and I'm a big fan of Gerald's. And yet, if they don't put it out, I know someone will put it out. So I'm looking forward to when it does make it out there, because tonight speaking with you has been just a real pleasure, and you have I don't know how to put this. You have kind of a gentle ease that makes talking about something as potentially devastating as the end of civilizations and the cyclical nature of that actually not so bad.
Well, because I face a problem, and we all face a problem, and that is the tendency for self-fulfilling prophecy. The thing that is going to defeat us in these periods of chaos and whatever powers that be is if we ourselves give over to despair and hopelessness.
Agreed.
I don't ever want to do that. That's why, I'm talking on this subject, and I want to give people a lot of information, because once you have that information, once you have a few skills, it's not too hard to learn this stuff. It's not beyond the ken of people. Everybody can pick this stuff up. Just a little bit of street smarts, a little bit of understanding of strategy, knowing, that these psychopaths, they really do just enjoy hurting you. I know I can't conceive of it. You can't conceive of it, but those are the facts. But once you have some of that, you are in a much better position. And, we'll get through this. And I don't want people to give up, that this is going to be apocalyptic. It's not going to be apocalyptic. All societies go through this, and then they come out again. And then there's another golden age, and then people are happy again. Trouble is, you just got to live and survive, and you do that by being smart and keeping your head down and working together with friends and family and just being smart about things. And then don't get distracted with all the, the reasons to hate one another. No, there's people to hate, and it's not the blacks or the gays or, it's got nothing to do with that. We all, bleed the same as the lyric goes. Our common enemy are, the malevolent people that eventually take control of our society and enjoy inflicting suffering on us. That's our enemy. So if we can unite in our goodness, we will defeat these people and we'll survive.
Amen, brother. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking to Stefan Verstappen. His website is urbansurvivalstrategies.com. Once again, that's urbansurvivalstrategies.com. He has another website, which is chinastrategies.com. His book is The Art of Urban Survival, and I highly recommend this. Tonight we were talking about some of the larger issues, but just to give you an idea of what kind of practical scenarios are in here, he talks about home safety, home defense, defense against a carjacking, what you need to have in your car emergency kit, your bug-out kit for your home, defense against a drunk, defense against a robber or street gang, how to deal with these people. And so there's it's not just all big ideas. There is some very practical, down-to-earth information that I think every family should take a look at, and I'm very glad that I have a copy. And you know what, Stefan, I've just really enjoyed our conversation tonight.
Yeah, me too. You guys, I got a sense from you through your emails that of the type of people you are, and psychopaths recognize each other. They get it. They know who they are in a crowd. They can tell each other. And you know what? With us guys, we can tell with each other too. I really think that we also have a sense that we can tell when people are trying to be decent and honest and have good intentions. And I could tell that from you guys right off the top.
I do agree. Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you, Stefan. We are going to let you go. Stefan, we want you to come back in the future when the paper comes out so we can discuss it even further. And anytime you have some new material or something you want to express, the door is open for you to come on here. It's been a great, fun show, and we thank you for being a part tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, guys. And, I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you, Stefan.
Bye-bye, then.